Hey there Jedi Masters, Knights, and Younglings. Welcome to Which Lightsaber Form, the video series where I take the role of a Blade Master, evaluating characters from different franchises and deciding which lightsaber forms suit them best. Today, I will be examining the fighting style of the Destiny Island trio, Tidus, Wakka, and Selphie.
You're going down! Yeah!
First, let's look at Tidus, and just so I can get this out the way to you Final Fantasy X purists who call him Tidus, I'm sorry, I've called him Tidus since I was about 13 years old when I first played Final Fantasy X. It makes more sense to me because Tidus sounds like Tide, and he's a very water-based kind of character with blitzball and everything like that. So yes, I'm going to be calling him Tidus, not Tidus. Sorry, but not sorry. Tidus to me is an almost exclusive user of Ataru, with maybe the simple blade strokes of Shicho. Like I discussed in my Padawan video versus video between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka Tano, it's kind of the progression that most Padawans kind of go through. Shicho, they all have to learn it. It's the most basic principles of lightsaber combat. But then what tends to happen is that they skip over Form 2 because it's a little bit too disciplined and it takes a long time to kind of get the hang of. And then with Form 3 Tsuresu, it's also kind of like, I don't want to spend all my time defending myself, I want to just get into the action. So what we see from a lot of Padawans is that they're very acrobatic and they're very keen on using their force abilities to enhance their physical output. And that's exactly what Tidus does in the Kingdom Hearts 1 video game. He comes straight at you and overcommits on all of his strikes. And the major issue with Tidus's use of Ataru in this hypothetical sense is that he's backing it up with very simplistic Shicho blade strokes, where he's just using the horizontal line or the vertical line, but not really using the intricacies of what Ataru masters usually use, which is flank subversion and the use of the twirling blade work of Ataru to subvert their opponent. And because of this, he becomes one of the more easy opponents to deal with within the confines of the Kingdom Hearts Destiny Island level, because he's so predictable. Oddly enough, Tidus actually does best when he goes on the defensive. Whenever you as the player or as Sora attack him and miss your attack, what he does is that he does this backflip and then does this front flip attack right off the bat. So that is when he's most effective, is when he's waiting for his opponent to make the first attack or to overextend themselves to then use his rapid speed, which he's really good at. Because as we know from Tidus in the original Final Fantasy X game, he's all about speed and haste and time magic and stuff like that. So for him to use it to his benefit seems to be through these defensive measures. If I was Tidus's Blade Master, I would recommend him to a master of Ataru like a Shaak Ti or a Yoda, just so he can learn the principles of flank subversion. And also to teach him the flow of Ataru, so that he's not so static in his attack pattern, so they're not just single-minded attacks. But I wouldn't even put him with one of these Blade Masters until he proves to me that he's gone through the steps of Makashi Form 2 and Tsuresu Form 3. Once he has a more fully rounded skill set to work off of, then he can move on to other masters. For Selphie, I would say she uses Niman and Makashi. Her use of the whip only really works within the confines of Form 6, in a similar sense to how Exar Kun uses his weapon for the unorthodox and to show his opponent a different look. And this is presented best within Form 6 more all-inclusive style. As we know, Form 6 is a balance of all the other forms and usually births out all these unorthodox kind of tactics, whether we're talking about Jar-Kai, dual blade fencing, or we're talking about the integration of force abilities, or if we're talking about the saber staff, the creation of the saber staff, or in this case, a lightsaber whip or a jump rope in Selphie's case. Now, Selphie is different from Exar Kun because she's not really applying her style in the sense that she's trying to trick her opponent, or she's not showing like, here's this trick, or here's this trick, or here's that trick. Let's see how you deal with all these different things that I'm showing you. But she's using it more in a sense of balance sense. And she balances and tapers her use of Niman and all of this unorthodox weaponry with the footwork of Makashi. As you can see from her fights with Sora, she doesn't usually use acrobatics in the same sense that Tidus does, where he's using backflips to evade. She, on the other hand, is always jumping back and keeping Sora in front of her. She's always trying to make sure she knows where Sora is within her space so that she can effectively counter. And she's always trying to maintain her distance, which is also a principle of Makashi and its footwork, is really managing the space of the battle, keeping that central line of combat. And all of her attacks, whether it's just her standard whip or if it's her tornado attack thing that she does, she's always trying to maintain that distance. She doesn't want to get anyone in her space, rather than Tidus, who is okay with you coming right into his space. As a Blade Master, I would recommend she study with someone who is a master of the whip, so someone like Githany or Lumaya, taking her basic offensive flurries, because it is, even though I do think she does have the principles of Niman, she definitely doesn't have the mastery of Niman. I would never consider her that kind of a master because her attacks are so very basic. But if she is learning from these masters, she'll learn some more skill sets and techniques that will be a little bit more, even more unorthodox than what she's already doing. And because Selphie is so in love with keeping her distance and moving away from Sora, or moving in a place where she can establish a better foothold for her attacks, I would even recommend she, have a master or some lessons with masters with the principles of Soken, which is of course environmental advantage, like using the environment to your advantage within a fight. So masters like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, I would have her study with them, not so much, but just a little bit, so that she can even use her whip to an even greater advantage by using the environment as well, so she can attack from different locations.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Take this!
At first, I wasn't going to use Wakka because he doesn't really use a melee weapon. He's not really into melee combat, but after discussing it with Jin Sarai 1 via a late night Skype conversation, I realized that he can kind of be inside the umbrella of a dedicated Force user. Wakka's use of the Blitzball could be kind of likened to the telekinetic shoves and pushes that are used by Jedi Masters and Sith Masters. And with that, I would say his primary form would be, again, Form 6 Niman. And now the thing that's cool about Niman is that it's never the same between any two users or practitioners. As we saw from Selphie, she uses it in a very different way for a different reason, and that derives from melee combat. Now, if we see, things within the Star Wars lore, like if we look at Revan or we look at Chaos and Darach, we even see those two using Niman in different ways and different principles. And Niman is used in very dynamic ways, whether it is being used proactively like an Exar Kun or reactively like a Revan. It can be used to prepare yourself for all kinds of weaponry and different kinds of looks in a battle, or it can be used, as we are talking about in this case, for the forced integration. One of the principles of Form 6, as highlighted in the Jedi Path, is that it is used to integrate the use of the Force within Jedi combat. It's actually the way I feel Yoda should have been presented within the movies. I feel like he should have been beyond lightsaber combat, and that he should have used just the Force, and he should have been like this Niman practitioner who just was like, I'm done with using the lightsabers, I've moved beyond that. Especially when Form 6 is supposed to be the culmination of Jedi combat, it's supposed to be the clarity and moderation, and because there is this integration of the Force, it's supposed to be like, hey, forget about the physical realm and the physical combat, it's more about the Force combat. That's a whole different thing. Going into Wakka, I feel like he would be this kind of Jedi, this kind of Jedi consular who kind of has forsaken the use of a lightsaber and has a dedicated look on just the Force and using only the Force within combat. But the use of his Force or Blitzball is very distinctive in the sense that he takes a long time to rev up his throws, and this would be kind of equated to how a Jedi would try to rev up their telekinetic push. As we know from people who are more basic in the use of the Force, they have to use hand gestures to manifest their powers, versus someone who is of the utmost mastery only needs to use their mind. And the progression of this in terms of Wakka's training as a Jedi could derive from Ataru. And what we know of Form 4 Ataru is that a Jedi uses their entire body to manifest their techniques, which is similar to how Wakka is using the Blitzball, using his entire body to rev up those throws. The only issue with this is that it's also very predictable when he's going to use his throw, because he's doing this whole 360 spin to throw it, or he's jumping up in the air before he knocks you out. And when his opponent breaches his defensive bubble, he uses what I would say, in the game he uses like this tornado like ball thing where he just like goes around in circles and hits you with the ball. For me, if we're equating this to Jedi combat, I would think it's most similar to a Force repulse, where he's building up this power and just letting it out of himself in kind of like a more of an area of effect type of ability, rather than a dedicated straight line throw. If I were his Blade Master, I would have him study with the Jedi counselors of the age so that he can learn more about how he can use the Force in a more masterful way, because like I was saying before, he's very telegraphed in the way that he's using his blitz ball. So if he was a Jedi, I would say, hey, you should probably, meet up with people like Revan or Chaos Indira or Satil Shan, so that you can understand how to use the Force with a little bit more mastery, so that it's more about not the physical exertion of trying to manifest the Force, but how you use it just from using your mind alone. Of course, this is all my opinion based on the lore of Star Wars and Kingdom Hearts. Do you agree with the lightsaber forms attributed to the Destiny Island trio, or do you think they use different forms? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, peace, love, may the Force be with you, and remember, one who knows nothing can understand nothing.